Before deciding on Bezos, I went through kind of a short list of bald people to use for my headbutt.
Tell me, when you fell off that roof like that, did your whole life pass before your eyes? He says, oh Lord, no, I only fell 10 feet.
It's a horse.
Okay.
And if the animal has a sore throat, he's horse. There's a big difference.
So last night, at about midnight, Simon Roper uploaded a video and I thought, hey, I'm gonna watch this because I watch all of his videos as soon as they come out. And I watched it and I fell asleep about 9 minutes in. Like 5 minutes ago, I woke up and I went and looked to see if I had any messages. I did, from my buddy Charlie. They sent me a link to the video and they said, go to like 9 minutes and 30 seconds right now. And fucking look at what I saw.
As I was writing this video, I noticed that a fantastic channel called Raya Dawn had uploaded a video about this exact merger, so I'd highly recommend their video on that, and I won't focus on it here. But all the same, as Raya points out,
the video that he just shouted out is one that I am currently remaking, so I have to upload that remake now.
I'm done talking about Australia. I've talked about Australia like 7 videos in a row or something like that. I'm done with it, alright? This video I'm going to talk about something that I find genuinely really interesting that's not related to Australia at all, okay? So, in a lot of dialects of English around the world, horse and horse are not homophones like they are in my dialect. And if you speak one of these dialects, then you're probably like, yeah, obviously they're not. And if you don't speak one of these dialects, then you've probably got no idea. What do I do with my arms? What am I supposed to do with these things? I've never like stood up for a recording before. What the hell? Now, if you do speak a dialect that differentiates horse and horse, as well as a couple other usually homophonous words like morning, morning, war, war, can't think of any others right now, but there's a lot of them. If you're one of these people who differentiates those words in your native accent, then you're probably from one of 4 places. That is North America, Ireland, Scotland, or weirdly India. And there are other places that do it just a lot more inconsistently. And now when I first read that it was found in North America, Ireland, and Scotland, I thought, oh, this is one of those things, right? Like the cot-caught merger that originated in Scotland or Ireland and then got brought over to North America by Scottish and Irish people. But no, instead of having innovated this feature, they are retaining a much older feature that previously all dialects of English had. If we go back like 500 years in the past, right? Before American and British and Australian or English, all of those dialects had diverged from one another, the standard English language of those times distinguished all of these words. The vowel in horse, war, and morning was completely distinct from the vowel in horse, war, and morning. And so it's not that these dialects of English have invented a distinction that previously never existed. Rather, it's that the rest of the world has lost a distinction that they have managed to maintain. Now, the way that we distinguish these 2 vowels is through something called a lexical set, which is basically just a collection of words which all have the same vowel in them. For horse, the animal, all of those words with that vowel, like horse, war, morning, belong to the north lexical set. They all have the same vowel as in north. Whereas the vowel in horse, war, and morning, all of those vowels, all of those words belong to the lexical set of force. They all have the same vowel as in force. This process of merging the vowels in the force set with those of the north set is called the Horse-Hoarse Merger, because when it happens, those 2 words become homophones. It's happened in my dialect, so for me they're homophones, but for a Scottish person it hasn't happened, and so horse and horse are not homophones. Now obviously in my dialect I pronounce both of these vowels the same, but I also don't pronounce the consonant that was previously inside of those vowels. I guess not really inside of, but next to them. It's complicated, but there used to be a r sound at the ends of those vowels. Horse and horse. They weren't always pronounced horse and horse, they were pronounced horse and horse, and that r phoneme is the key to this whole thing. I'm going to make a video soon talking about how the r phoneme in English, the letter R, that consonant, whatever you want to refer to it as, it has completely messed up a bunch of vowels over our history. Just there have been so many instances of vowels that were just perfectly normal, and all of a sudden this consonant has come in and changed their direction completely. Basically, the short and tall of it is that the force lexical set used to be the long O in goat before an R, and then the north lexical set used to be a short O, like in lot, before an R. But due to the influence of the r sound that came after those vowels, they diverged from the rest of the words that they previously shared the same vowel with. they ended up becoming homophones. They ended up being pronounced the same, and the distinction between those two vowels was lost. And that's how it remains in a lot of dialects today that are descended from the older English of England, like Australian English, South African English, New Zealand English. A lot of those dialects, we've inherited that merger of those two vowels, and we all think of it as just that's how it is. Like I said, before I learned about this, I never would have guessed in a million years that horse and horse used to be pronounced differently. I mean, it makes sense that they would have been pronounced differently because they're spelt differently, but that just never crossed my mind. English spelling is enough of a nightmare already. In Ireland and Scotland, the distinguishing of these two vowels is pretty consistent. Most people do it. Those who don't probably live in more urban areas with more influence from England to them. But the general populations of those countries do tend to keep them distinct and sort of preserve this much older distinction.
On the north shore was Awapa, formed by the Picts. On the southern shore,
Before deciding on Bezos, I went through kind of a short list of bald people.
Now, I don't know much about English within India. I don't know much about how it's taught, how people learn it, the contexts in which it's used, but all I know is that a lot of people in India, when they speak English, pronounce horse and horse differently. And that seems to be because there are a lot of features of English spoken in India, because English ended up there a long time ago, a good, I don't know, I think it was the 1800s. I don't know my Indian history very well, but I think it was around then where the British invaded and they imported English as a language into India. And so since it was established there such a long time ago, there are still a lot of people in India who use older pronunciations of words, and that can extend to distinguishing horse from horse.
And more to our liking. Even so, on her first morning.
Now, the situation in North America with the horse-horse distinction is pretty complex. I don't think there are many young people anywhere in North America today who tell them apart. I'm sure there are some, but I don't think there's very many. You'll mostly find the distinctions where you do find them in middle-aged or old people. And in the 1900s, apparently it was pretty common in the United States to pronounce horse and horse differently, you know, among just the general population. But nowadays, you'll sort of only find it in pockets around the place. I know there's some older people in the Ottawa Valley who used to pronounce them differently, but that generation's mainly passed on now.
Give you more time to work out, eh? Like when you were doing your ploughing and all the work with the horses.
There's some parts in the Maritimes of Canada, in places like Newfoundland, which have a lot of Irish influence or Scottish influence, where they do still pronounce them differently, fairly robustly as well, just like in Ireland.
Sarah warned that this course of treatment might be expensive.
In 1842, there was 4 of us.
My father, we stored it up there, sitting in the corners.
Beyond that, you'll also sometimes find the distinction in the south of the United States, in places like Texas or Alabama or Georgia.
It's a horse. Okay. And if the animal has a sore throat, he's horse.
And beyond that, New England, in places like, you know, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, states like that, you will find a lot of people as well who distinguish them. But again, they're all fairly old, and I don't think a lot of young people in New England pronounce them differently.
After the Air Force, I moved to Dorchester, which is part of Boston. Now,
I'd like to quickly zone in on a few places in North America that used to tell horse and horse apart, and maybe still do, just not as much as they used to. I'd like to zone in on 2 case studies where something interesting has happened with the vowels. The first one of interest is in New England, where until relatively recently the horse-horse distinction was maintained pretty well. And then also in the city of St. Louis in Missouri, or St. Louis, I don't know how they say it. St. Louis. It's probably St. Louis, I don't know. Oh god, I should have done my research. I did my research. It's St. Louis or St. Louis. I don't think that matters, but it's definitely Louis, not Louis. They're not that French. Now in St. Louis, along with a few other places in the American South, but apparently it was most prominent in St. Louis, the vowels in North and Force were kept very distinct. However, the vowel in North did end up merging with another vowel. It just wasn't Force, it was Start. The OR vowel in words like North and Morning merged with the AR vowel in words like Start and Far. This ended up meaning that a lot of other pairs of words became homophones where they aren't in other dialects of English, like far and for became homophones, but not far and for. For and for remained distinct, but for lost its distinction with far, and so for and far both merged into far, but for stayed distinct from both of them. And so in those parts of the American South, you end up with something pronounced something like, and please excuse me for this, something like horse and horse.
The workers down there say, "What do you do with this old oil?" And I said, "Well, I spray it in horse arenas and You know who he hauled it for, and they couldn't tell you that. I think the majority of people don't know who Northeastern Pharmaceutical Company is. Then he called me and asked me if I want to haul some more, and I said yes, but I'm going to charge you a nickel a gallon to haul it.
Another pair of words that gets combined into a homophone is card and cord, and so this merger of these two lexical sets ends up being called the cot-caught merger, again because those words end up as homophones on the other side of it.
I also happen to know that in very old English dialects, like you can see this a lot in the existing phonology of English dialects by Alexander J. Ellis, published in 1889, the cot-caught merger was also present in a lot of dialects in rural parts of England, and I think maybe Ireland as well, and I think it might even be in Ireland currently, but I'm not as sure about the bit about Ireland. But yeah, it's in England. Look at these bits of paper.
Now in New England, something very different happened. New England traditionally is a non-rhotic region, just like England and Australia and New Zealand. And so the R in force ended up being dropped, and force ended up being pronounced as force, which is really similar to how a lot of Australians and English people say it.
After the force.
But something interesting happened in New England that didn't happen in all of these other non-rhotic places, and that was that force and north got kept distinct from one another. But here's the thing, right? So, the vowel, for me, the vowel in fort is the same as the vowel in fort. And that also goes for New Zealand, South Africa, England as well. So for all of us, the long or vowel that you get in words like law and thought ended up merging with the or in words like force, and also the or in words like north, which only happens in non-rhotic places. That's the only place where it can happen. Now in New England, this process did happen, but only with the north vowel, because of course they still kept north and force distinct, unlike the rest of us.
Tell me, when you fell off that roof like that, did your whole life pass before your eyes? He says, oh Lord, no, I only fell 10 feet.
Now on top of this, most of New England also has the cot-caught merger, where the short O in words like cot, hot, lot is pronounced the same as that or vowel in words like law and thought. So court and cot end up both being pronounced as something like cart or cart. And so in New England, all three of these vowels, the O in lot, the O in north, and the however you explain that vowel in court, all ended up being pronounced exactly the same as something like or R. But the forced vowel was kept out of this whole conundrum, and so it ended up being cot, horse, horse.
Now, I should point out, the cot-caught merger hasn't been around forever in New England. It's not like it was there since the beginning of the New England dialect. If I show you this chart here, which is made from an acoustic analysis of the speech of a guy from, I think, Jonesport or somewhere around there in Maine, he was born in the late 1800s, and you can see that he does have a merger of the sets that are north and thought, those two sets, but he does not have a merger between those two and cot. There's a slight difference that he maintains in his speech, and that's visible in the acoustic analysis that I'm showing you here. And this is backed up by some other historical analyses that tell us that New England didn't always have the cot-caught merger, but it has, for a lot longer time, had a merger between thought and north. And if you look back at older dialects, recordings of older dialects,
where they walked through, so they kept themselves warm and they kept the animals warm. The only light they had was when they opened their front door.
Or like you look at the existing phonology of English dialects by Alexander Ellis, published in 1889. You can see that in a lot of non-rhotic dialects of England that don't have the horse-hoarse merger, which actually used to be quite a lot of them before the 1900s. All of these non-rhotic dialects without the merger, they seemed to merge the vowel in thought with the vowel in north, but they didn't merge either of those with the vowel in force.
Walk on the door. Walk on the door.
Sometimes, let me be real with you, they didn't even merge the vowel in force with the vowel in door. In the historical section, I talk about how, there used to be a lot more distinctions within the force set than before it was just, one big set. It used to be a lot of smaller sets, and they sort of converged into the force set. But either way, what I'm trying to get at here is, what is it? New England used to have a much more typical situation, which was found even in England, where north and thought were merged, force was kept distinct, and lot was kept distinct. right? But then it had the cot-caught merger, and that's kind of what makes this crazy, right? This whole conundrum comes from the fact that lot and north used to have the same vowel, but then the R changed the vowel and they diverged, and now New England's pulled them back together through non-roticity. It's crazy. Sorry if I'm shivering, it's really cold here.
And so to go over all of these different sounds, again, go over all of them. In my dialect, you've got horse, horse, caught, cot, start. In New England, you've got horse, horse, caught, caught, start. And in some parts of the American South, especially in St. Louis, you've got horse, horse, caught, caught, start. But I'd like to reiterate, that is mainly among older people, middle-aged or older. Among young people, pretty much everywhere in North America, horse and horse are pronounced the same, just like in the rest of the world, except beastly old Ireland and Scotland, and that one bit of Newfoundland. And if we want to look at the reason that there was a distinction in the first place, we've got to look at the history of those vowels in the first place. Previously, these two vowels used to be a bunch of different vowels that all came before the r phoneme. And over the years, these like 5 different vowels all combined to just become 2, and then eventually, in dialects like mine, there became just 1. Now, the history of the North lexical set is relatively simple to track, because it started out as just the short letter O sound that you get in words like lot and cot and hot. That sound, that O sound, before the letter R. So back in like Shakespeare's time, these words would have been pronounced something like horse, morning, war.
I don't know how I forgot this at the time, but war wouldn't have been in the North lexical set until after Shakespeare's time. Now here's the thing, so the O thing that I just talked about, like north and horse, that was the first source of 2 sources, 2 main sources for the North lexical set. The second source is where you get words like war and worn, which are spelt with an A instead of an O. And you might look at that and think, well, why is that spelling different? It, of course, just like most weird spellings, that tends to reflect an older difference in pronunciation that's not there anymore. What was the case with war and worn is the same thing that's the case with words like swan, where you used to have an A vowel, which is represented by the letter A, so you would have swan, ware, and warn, and then over time the A, because of the influence of the W, you know, in order to make a W you have to round your lips, and that kind of influenced the A to change into an O sound, because in most dialects of English, to pronounce an O sound, you also have to round your lips. So the influence of the W kind of changed the A into an O. And this happened in heaps of words like, I don't know, was, swan, swap, all sorts of words like that. And it also extended to words like war and worn. So they would have changed from war and warn to war and warn. And that is the point at which they would have joined all the other words we've got here as O plus
And we'll just leave that there. We'll get back to that lexical set in a bit. The Force lexical set has a much more complicated history. It's made up of like what was originally about 3 or 4 different vowels that all coalesced into one. So nowadays the words door, floor, bore, more, I think those are the main 4. I'll add another one if I'm forgetting it, but I can remember those 4 for now. All of those words nowadays belong to the Force lexical set, but they also originally had different vowels. The word door in Old English was duru with a short u sound. Meanwhile, floor has always had a long o sound before it. More, M-O-R-E, originally had a long R sound in Old English. And meanwhile, the word bore previously had a short O, just like the North words, but due to a thing called open syllable lengthening, which is a very complicated process that happened in Middle English, it explains why an E at the end of English word spelling typically produces a long vowel. That process resulted in bore and more ending up with the same vowel, and then there was a bunch of other things and a bunch of different vowel sounds that were previously separate in Old English and early Middle English. They all fell together into a lexical set that nowadays we call the Force set.
A lot of words from the North set actually moved over to the Force set. I don't know when this happened, but it happened quite a long time ago. A bunch of these words moved between sets based on the consonant that preceded them. If the consonant was a labial consonant like f, m,
p, consonants like that, then there was a pretty high likelihood if the following vowel was a north vowel that it would be moved over to the forced set. So for example, this happened with words like pork and port and sport and fort. The sound change wasn't applied consistently. That's why you get fort having moved over to the forced set, but for, F-O-R, stayed behind in the north set. There are still some pretty consistent spelling rules that you can use to predict which set a word will be in. Like if it ends with E, then it's more likely to be in the forced set, but that's not a hard and fast rule because horse is in the north set, but RS isn't typically allowed as, you know, the final spelling of a base, like a root word in English, and so an E had to be added onto the end to abide by that rule, and then you end up breaking the rule that we had in the first place. And the forced set, back in the olden days, like 500 years ago or so, could be analysed as the vowel in goat plus the r sound, because back then in most major dialects of English, the word goat was pronounced something like gort. Gort and force both have the same vowel in them, it's just that force has a r at the end. So really in that stage of English's development they're the same vowel. But over time, the vowel in goat starts to change, and in most people watching won't pronounce goat as gort. If you're in certain regions, you definitely will, but most English speakers around the world pronounce it with a diphthong, say something like goat or goat, something like that. It varies where you are, but nowadays those vowels are different. The goat vowel underwent all these changes in different dialects, unless it came before the r phoneme, and so gort and force originally had the same vowel, but gort changed to something like goat or goat, where depending on where you are, whereas before an R, it stayed exactly the same. Force stayed as something like force. And then in England, they lost the r sound, and then that became a whole thing, non-roticity. I made a video about that. Wow, Raya, you make that look really difficult. So there you go, there is the history and the mystery of a pair of vowels that you might not have known about. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I'm gonna talk to Jeff Lindsay now. Yeah, that guy. Oh, that reminds me.
In one of my last videos that I uploaded before this, at the end of it, I was like, hey, is Jeff Lindsay a member of my channel?
I don't know if it's the Dr. Jeff Lindsay who has become a member for my channel.
And he messaged me on Discord afterwards. I didn't know he used Discord, but he messaged me on Discord afterwards and he was like, yeah, lol, that's me. And I lost my shit.
Thank you to the awesome Jeff Lindsay. He gives me $10 a month, so thank you, Jeff. $10 a month will grant you exclusive perks, such as shoutouts at the ends of the videos, and early access to said videos, and voting on the topics of the videos, and maybe one day exclusive live streams planned for the future. So thank you, Jeff. I'd also like to thank my other members, Connor, Bailey or Arnold Field, I'm not quite sure, and of course Velocihog. If you would like to become a member, do it. Just do it. Yep. Pretty please, just do it.